Well, good morning, everybody. I think I can actually say good morning and catch all the time zones. Welcome to my podcast. My name is Angie Hughes. I'm with Producers XL, and my podcast is called The Long Term, Angie's advice for agents. Don't really know if it's advice, but just things that I find interesting. And this month, the month of September, with it being Life Insurance Awareness Month, I've been doing some life insurance sales meetings, going to them, attending them, partly because, one, I just need to be a little bit more entrenched in that, but two, because we're finding that in the long-term care industry, more and more sales are going towards life insurance solutions and not even really hybrid solutions. So when we start talking about long-term care solutions, usually it's traditional long-term care, or it's like a Securian or a Nationwide or a MoneyGuard or a One America, policies that are life insurance, based, but really designed for the long-term care solution. We're actually finding more sales going towards chronic illness riders, long-term care riders on universal life insurance contracts, on indexed UL contracts, things of that nature where, we can still give them the guarantees, but everybody seems to have a little bit more comfort in the fact that it's an, oh, by the way, instead of, no, this is really going to happen. So I received, interestingly enough, and some of you may have seen this, Global Atlantic, which is one of my carriers that I use for a long-term care annuity solution. They put out information on basically how to help your clients through divorce, widowhood, and caregiving. And I read this, and it was 5 pages long, talking about all the different things. And I hope all of my male listeners don't think I'm being preachy about women, but if you're in the long-term care industry, you do know that women play a very important role when it comes to talking about extended care planning. And a lot of it is just, even if you go from just the statistical side of things, not because we sell on statistics, but because typically women live longer than men. And we can kind of make all the puns and jokes we want as to why that is. I could give you a great example about trying to take a tree down in our backyard over the weekend and tying the tree to a truck and making sure it falls the right way. That was my husband's idea. So we have all these funny ideas as to why that is, but typically women do live longer. And so when you're thinking through a long-term care sale, and presenting to a husband and wife, it would definitely behoove you to pay attention to the female. And this article that I read through, and I wanted to share some of these things with you because there are so many different ways that we could go about putting together marketing plans, talking to your clients. How do we do this? Like, for instance, I'm in Salina, Kansas, and they put on a for women's only show, which you can imagine you're going to go through, and there's going to be, baking and dresses and jewelry and stuff. But what a great place to exhibit for insurance. And if you're a male and you want to I think it would be fantastic, because you're going to have a captured audience of females, and they're going to understand. And I'm going to use the word, and if you could see me, right, we're a podcast, so you can't, but women play it out. And what I mean by that, and if you've ever heard Harley Gordon talk about extended care planning, women's brains just function differently, right? Haha, guys, you can make the jokes there as well. But we're always kind of, not that men don't, but we're always thinking forward. Meaning, I've already thought about what's for dinner tonight. What do I have to get done? What are we doing this weekend? I've got to, all the things that are going on. Whereas with my husband, I tell him the morning of, remind him at lunch, and then remind him again when I see him when we get home that this is what we have plans for this evening, or whatever the case is, because he's just not planning that out. He's not playing that forward. And so when you think about talking to women in extended care planning, it really does work. Their minds are thinking, right? You can just see the cogs just spinning, because they realize that if there's no big age difference there, that they more than likely will outlive their spouse. And they are concerned about things like, how am I going to have care provided for me? I don't want that burden to be on my children. We're going through this right now with our family. It's interesting. So I want to read you some things on here, which, we used to call it the silver tsunami, talking about all the baby boomers, and those baby boomers have been aging into Medicare and age 65 for several years now. They've got another analogy called the gray divorce, and I'll get to that in a minute, but they've gone through, there's a management consulting firm called Oliver Wyman, and I'm reading from the Global Atlantic report, that noted in 2020 that the financial services industry, has left nearly $700 billion a year on the table by failing to address the unique financial challenges that women face. And there's a whole host of reasons why. And it says, in fact, there's another consulting firm, McKinsey and Company, that estimate women control almost $11 trillion in assets in the United States today. And they also go on to say that number is only going to increase as the male baby boomers die and transfer those assets to their female spouses, who are going to outlive them by, on average, more than 5 years. There's a huge planning opportunity with this. But what I thought was interesting, as we go through this report, it talks about divorce, widowhood, and caregiving. And it says, among the many challenges that women are facing as they get older, women over the age of 50 are increasingly finding themselves divorced, widowed, and caregiving. And how do you help them navigate through those waters without neglecting what they find as urgent? So the first thing they talk about is the divorce, and they call it the gray divorce. And it says women between 55 and 64, the divorce rate has tripled since 1990. It's increased sixfold for women over 65, according to a study by the National Care for Family and Marriage out of Bowling Green University, which is crazy because they even go on to say that, for the most part, the man was the one that was always the male spouse was always the one taking care of the finances. And they're air quoting in here, the unfortunate reality is that most women in these age groups, the marital deal struck early in their marriages left the husband in charge of both finances and dealing with the family's financial planner. So left alone, and now she's divorced. How does she navigate through all of that? And so there's a wonderful opportunity there. And I follow a lot of groups on LinkedIn and on Facebook. There are a lot of females in finance marketing groups out there, or planning groups out there, marketing to women on how they strategize basically in the last quarter of their life, and how do they get through all of that. And I think some of the things that I have found, they do talk quite a bit about the number of females that actually leave their financial professionals. And it was overwhelming. Some 70% of widows, now I'm not talking about divorce now, obviously, some 70% of widows leave their financial professionals who had represented the couple within a year of the spouse's death. I can actually attest to that. My mother-in-law left her financial planner after the death of her spouse, because she just didn't feel like he was getting her, and he never really spoke to her throughout this process. Now, granted, maybe, my father-in-law was the one that was in charge of the family finances and he made all the financial decisions, but there's got to be a recognition at some point that I could be having a conversation with a widow, whether it be him or her, but that conversation does change. When we start talking about that widowhood, what's interesting, it says the average age at which women become widows in the United States is 59.4. The life expectancy for women is 80 years and a half. That's a long time for them to have exposure and need somebody to help them kind of walk through what their financial future looks like. That's exactly what we had to do with my mother-in-law. We actually ended up, when she traded financial advisors, we then went back, sat down with the new one, talked about her goals, her aspirations, what was important to her, because what was important to her wasn't necessarily important to my father-in-law. Not that the finances and not outliving the money, that was obviously the number one concern. But I can tell you, fast forward, and I believe my father-in-law has been gone somewhere around 6 or 7 years now. So of course, we're obviously hitting that number I just told you about. Now our conversations have shifted, and it is still about outliving the money, but it's also about what happens if she needs care. Because I know a couple of podcasts ago, I spoke to all of you about, just not necessarily a long-term care claim, but what does that look like when the family becomes that primary caregiver? And that leads me into the next, talking about this article that Global Atlantic put out about that whole caregiving dynamic. And, they talk about the boomers being that sandwich generation. I will tell you, I think that sandwich generation is easily passing down to my generation, because we're the kids of the boomers. And now we're actually watching our parents age and realizing, what are they going to need? Are they in a home that is suitable for them? Little things like, you're used to having, and yes, this is a true story, you're used to having all kinds of wonderful plants in the summer and watering them and enjoying the blooms and watching them grow and the herbs. Well, guess what? If you can't get outside because your mobility is decreased to water those plants, and the family can't get up there every day in the heat of Kansas to water them, those plants die. And so you deal with a lot of other issues of, not just the balancing of caregiving, but I think some of the things that they missed in this article was loneliness. How do you help them through that? And the balance of caregiving is interesting because 2/3 of caregivers are women, and the time they spend prioritizing family over their career does cut very heavily into their earning potentials and their financial future. This played out very actively in our family. My sister-in-law is a nurse, and I know you guys, if you were on my podcast 2 podcasts ago, I think it was, maybe it was last month. No, it was in July. How that played out. My sister-in-law is a nurse. She works at an office every single day of the week. She took FMLA so she could go be with her mom, because we were seeing 5 doctor's appointments a week and trying to juggle that and find, because mom wasn't driving herself. So, she basically pulled herself out of her career to take care of her mom, and 4 weeks wasn't enough. Now, I'm really, really pleased to say, and we'll be having dinner with my mother-in-law tomorrow night, but I'm really excited. You can actually hear the pep in her voice back. So, this was a really long road to recovery, but that caregiving burden absolutely fell to my sister-in-law. And it's not because my husband can't be a caregiver, but there are just things that a son is, I don't want to say won't partake in, but certainly does not want to partake in a part of that caregiving role when it comes to his mother, let alone just another female. This article comes in and talks about, caregiving is bringing down our women baby boomers. By nature, women are nurturers to the detriment of their financial well-being. There was a MetLife Mature Market Institute that estimated women forfeit an average of nearly $143,000 in income to tend to their caregiving responsibilities, as well as supplementing their parents. So when we think about caregiving and what that looks like, I loved it. If all of you watched that TV series called This Is Us, what a wonderful TV show that was, right? It played out the whole family dynamics. It played through the dementia of the mother, the father deceasing early. I hope I'm not spoiler alerting any of this if y'all have DVR'd it and you're waiting to watch, but not all of us can end that life stage with our mother where we all move into this basically family compound to provide care. That's not reality. The reality is everybody still works. Everybody still has to get up and go to work. And yet the person in need of care is going to get that care. The countless seminars I've been to and heard other professionals speak about this, it's not the person in need of care that doesn't get the care. Somebody else is paying the price for that, and not just the financial price of that. So I found that to be interesting about how much, typically, and I'm not it's not just all women, but right, this article was all based around women and how that is such an untapped market, but how they have to budget for that. And women over 65 are far more likely than younger women to fall into that poverty because of what they're doing. And I know when my grandmother needed care, she was lucky. She had 9 children, 8 of which were girls. And my youngest aunt is 5 years older than me. So she had a large dynamic of girls, some that had retired, some of her daughters were retired. They could take her to doctor appointments. It wasn't impacting those that were still in the workforce. But I got to tell you, if you've not been through the whole caregiving game and what that takes, it is overwhelming. Even at the smallest fashion, it becomes very overwhelming. And I loved this article because it talks about, and if anybody wants this, please shoot me over an email. My email address is angie@producersxl.com. If you want this article, it's a quick read. It's got great information in it. And then if you want to have conversations about, how do I do this? How do I develop a seminar directing my conversation to women? I have so many fun ways that we can do this. And, I will be more than happy to come out and help you do this. But I am a little bit passionate when it comes to this because I've seen this play out in my own family. I'm watching it play out actively in my own family. And when you think about some of the things that, it talks about how do you attract and retain female clients? What do you, as that trusted advisor, as that financial professional, what do you have to do when you're dealing with women? And it's interesting because it says you have to listen with empathy, which if you've ever had, there are some women that are just talkers, a la you're listening to one of them. And so it's interesting when you listen to them, hearing what they're telling you with empathy. You might not necessarily understand what they're going through, and that's okay, but just hearing them makes a huge difference. And how do you communicate with them with reason? Because like I said, women have a tendency to play this out. They will work with you if you can help them put together a plan that coincides with their goals, no matter how big or how small those goals are. Educating them with support, making sure they completely understand. You collaborate with them and understand what their perspective is and what it is that they're looking for. And some of the other things I've already mentioned, some of this, it's a $700 billion a year industry that's not serving the financial needs of those women that are, quite frankly, going to be controlling an awful lot of assets in the future. With the divorce rates being higher, if they do end up getting remarried, again, Harley Gordon had this wonderful thing that said, if you have blended families where there's been remarriages, that's a great opportunity to talk about long-term care insurance, because even though you love your new, bonus children, there is a difference between my money and his money and my kids and your kids. And what are we going to get? Well, when all of a sudden there's a care need that arises and she's having to dip into her assets to take care of him, her kids might not be happy about that. So that's also an opportunity there, as well as, women just living quite a bit longer than men and needing help transitioning to becoming the financial head of their household. And what does that look like for them, and how do they put that plan in place? So it was just fascinating to me. I wanted to share it with you. I felt this podcast didn't necessarily need a whole lot of fluff to it. But some of these statistics in here, between how do you help them navigate through divorce, and how do you help them set their plan forward? What about widowhood? And I can't stress enough, even though this article didn't address this, but the loneliness that they go through. COVID didn't help any of that. And I certainly hope we never have to go back to that, where our seniors are stuck inside for periods of times. And I use the word senior, just because I'm talking like 65 plus, but by no means do I mean old. Big different terminology there. But what they go through when they were so isolated inside their homes. And I have to tell you, we experienced this. No matter what happens, even though your children can come over and we tried to make sure, and we were visiting all the time and staying connected, whether that, be text or, if you didn't feel good, you didn't go around family that would maybe be compromised, but the isolation that they felt, and then the loneliness that sets in. And then you have to be very, very careful, because everybody has the World Wide Web at their fingertips, and nobody ever gets too terribly far from their cell phone or their tablet. And I know none of you are shocked by this, but the scamming opportunities for folks when they have weak moments inside of being isolated and lonely, and then the depression and all of that stuff that sets in. So it's a wonderful opportunity that we would have to assist these women in the latter half of their staging, especially when they're basically left by themselves, whether that's divorce, whether that's widow, or they've taken on that permanent caregiving role, which many folks do. I would tell you many folks do, because we're lacking the proper insurance plan, the funding mechanism to pay for that care, which is even more of a reason why we have got to have these conversations with all of our clients, just opening that. I am finding more and more young, and I mean young. I just did an illustration for a 37-year-old female. She's the breadwinner of the family, and she wanted to make sure that she had a care plan in place. The other one I had not too long ago was a 52-year-old and 43-year-old. So they are watching all of this caregiving being played out by their parents, who are the boomers, and they're looking at this saying, I'm young, I've got a mortgage, I've got young children. How do I at least put a plan in motion, right? Maybe it's not the last step in the process for them. It's not this big, robust policy. But as we all know, with the amount of GoFundMe pages that pop up, there's many, many people out there that need more life insurance. And there are good options out there with long-term care riders. There's even some good chronic illness riders. I just say it's all really a matter of having that conversation with our clients. And if you ever really do want to focus on that female market, like I've told you in the past podcasts, women do talk with their eyes. So if you're a female advisor, you might have a little bit of advantage, because, there's things that we can say and wink, wink, and ha ha and nod, nod. And, there's just things you don't want your spouse to do for you, whether you're young, vibrant, and active, or you're needing some care after a surgery, or it's a long-term caregiving event. That's exactly what this insurance solution is designed to do, just to provide care for a longer and better period of time, so the family's not having to do that. That's really all I have for you. I tell you, next month is October. Podcast will be on October the 25th. I'll see if I can't find something spooktacular that we can talk about in October. Ha ha. That was my funny joke for next month's podcast. So thank you so much for joining me, and we will talk at you next month. Take care, everybody.